Most people picture a North Korean escape as one brave dash to freedom, but the safer truth is harsher. For many defectors, the border crossing is only the first step in a staircase of terror. South Korean records show 580 North Korean defectors had reached the South by March 2026, yet the path most of them faced was not a straight line, and almost never freedom at the river. This script follows the strongest overlap in verified testimony: hunger or fear at home, a night crossing into China, stateless danger there, brokers who may rescue or sell you, and the strange burden of surviving. The decision to leave usually does not begin with a speech about democracy. It begins with survival, and famine accounts from North Hamgyong province show that with painful clarity. Yoonju, who grew up there, remembered the 1990s famine so sharply that one family detail says more than any slogan. Her father stole her backpack, traded it for food, and still died of starvation. Her mother decided she would rather be shot crossing the river than stay and wait to starve, and that sentence captures what many defectors mean when they say escape was not abstract politics. Other testimonies add more triggers to the same pressure cooker: fear of arrest, punishment for black market activity, ideological suspicion, domestic abuse, family disgrace, and the growing sense that outside survival might be possible. That is why many people do not flee because they already imagine a new life in Seoul. They flee because they are trying to survive the next month, the next winter, or the next knock at the door. The route most people imagine is wrong, because civilians almost never run through the demilitarized zone. The common escape historically has been north, into China, across the Tumen River, and sometimes the Yalu. That crossing often happens at night, in winter, or under broker timing, which is why so many testimonies repeat the same sensory details: black water, cracked ice, hard breath, and the fear of a gunshot. In Yoonju's account, the crossing came in February 1999, in brutal cold, with the river mostly frozen, and she walked behind her mother and sister while slipping again and again. At one thinner tributary section, she broke through the ice and plunged into the water, then realized her feet still touched bottom, a tiny detail that makes the scene feel more real than any movie shot. That is how these escapes often work. Survival hangs on inches, not on hero speeches, and the body reaches China shivering long before the mind can decide whether safety has actually begun. Because for many defectors, China is not freedom at all. It is the most dangerous stretch, since Chinese authorities have long treated North Koreans as illegal economic migrants rather than refugees. That legal choice changes everything, because repatriation can mean interrogation, detention, torture, sexual violence, forced labor, forced abortion, or even execution after return to North Korea. A 2024 rights report confirmed that forced returns from China continued after the border reopened, including mass repatriations, which is why defectors talk about China as both shelter and trap. One of the darkest parts of the route is the broker system, because the same person can look like a guide in one village and a seller in the next. Some brokers truly move defectors from safe house to safe house across Chinese provinces and toward Mongolia or Southeast Asia, but others turn hunger and fear into a market. For women especially, the line between broker and trafficker can vanish instantly, and reports describe repeated methods: fake job offers, lies about restaurant work, drugged food, forced marriage, prostitution, and debt bondage. Documented sale prices often begin in the range of a few thousand renminbi and rise with age, fertility, and local demand, reducing a human life to a price list during transit. Yoonju's testimony shows how sudden that trap can be. A Korean-speaking woman first offered food and shelter, then soon after her mother was sold to a Chinese man. Because Yoonju and her sister were small for their age, traffickers could not easily separate them, so the children remained with their mother, and the family lived in confinement for 3 years. That detail changes the meaning of escape, because the first warm meal after crossing the river is sometimes not rescue at all. It is the bait that leads to the next prison. Other first-person testimony echoes the same pattern with different faces and places, which is why the broad structure holds even when one celebrity account is later disputed. One woman described following a broker paid by her father, crossing the Tumen, and then hearing from the broker's wife that she had already been sold to a wealthy Chinese man. She was told she would be married within a week, and the house itself became part of the fear. The door was locked, the phone wires were cut, and her mind went blank. She escaped by jumping from the second floor, which sounds cinematic until you remember that every step after that still carried the risk of police checks, informers, and resale. Near the Vietnam border, she later hid under a bus and heard dogs barking and a siren when the vehicle was stopped, another small sound detail that keeps repeating in real accounts. In Vietnam, that same testimony described sexual harassment by guards during interrogation, showing again that one border crossing does not end the abuse. It often only changes uniforms. Later, while escaping again, she crossed the Mekong River barefoot with water up to her neck, trying to keep a photograph of her brother dry, and that image explains family grief better than statistics do. Yet the statistics matter too, because they show how many people get trapped between route segments and how dangerous the system became after the pandemic years. A 2024 investigation reported that North Korea created 1 to 2 kilometer buffer zones along parts of the northern border and ordered guards to shoot on sight anyone entering without permission. Satellite analysis found expanded border fencing, new patrol roads, extra watchtowers, more guard posts, and more layers of barriers, turning escape into something harder than the pre-2020 world. The human result was steep. South Korean arrivals dropped from 1,047 in 2019 to 2019 to 29 in 2020, then just 63 in 2021 and 67 in 2022. Arrivals recovered only partly, reaching 19,600 in 2023, 236 in 2024, and 223 in 2025, which still left the flow far below the years before the pandemic. That decline also means many people reaching South Korea now were not fresh border crossers at all. They had often been stranded outside North Korea, especially in China, for years. When arrest does happen in China, the return process becomes its own theater of fear, and Yunju's account after repatriation is especially revealing on that point. She described being sent back with almost nothing, forced through a physical examination for hidden money, and learning that crying, or pleading, only raised the chance of being beaten. Another rights testimony told of an interrogator punching a detained woman in the eye so hard that she permanently lost sight there, which shows why the word repatriation sounds so mild compared with reality. That terror shapes every decision on the road, from trusting a guide to stepping into a vehicle, because one wrong turn can end not in failure alone but in violent return. For the people who keep moving, the onward routes after China are long, expensive, and dependent on a fragile chain of strangers, code words, and hidden payments. Some travel through Mongolia and the Gobi Desert, while others move through Southeast Asia, especially Laos and Thailand, sometimes by way of Cambodia or Vietnam. Thailand became a known route, because detention there was more likely to end in transfer to South Korea rather than forced return to North Korea, which changed the risk map. But even that relative safety had a cost, since defectors often reported paying thousands of dollars through family networks or South Korea-based support channels to keep the chain alive. So the journey is not one act of courage. It is repeated courage under hunger, cold, statelessness, resale, arrest, and the constant chance that the next helper may become the next captor. Family separation makes the cost even heavier, because people who survive often cannot safely contact relatives left behind, and survey data in South Korea keeps showing that pain. In defector surveys, one of the most common reasons for dissatisfaction is still separation from family in the north, which means freedom often arrives carrying guilt instead of relief alone. Yunju later said she wanted to visit her father's grave and came to see that he too was a victim of the regime, a reflection that turns anger into a more complicated grief. Life in South Korea also refuses to become a clean movie ending, even though measurable progress exists and many people do build stable lives after arrival. A 2025 refugee survey found 81% of North Korean defectors said they were satisfied with life in South Korea, the highest level since that survey began in 2011. Employment reached 61.3% and unemployment fell to 5.4%, which shows real gains in adaptation, work access, and daily stability for many resettled people. But the same data showed earnings still lagging by roughly 23% compared with South Korean-born residents, and trauma does not disappear just because a paycheck appears. Defectors continue to face depression, loneliness, education gaps, technical language gaps, digital adaptation stress, status anxiety, and the constant fear that public speech could harm relatives back home. Women make up about 72% of cumulative arrivals, and post-pandemic cohorts have been even more female-heavy, which keeps trafficking and gendered violence at the center of the story. The peak arrival year was 2009 with 2,914 arrivals, and that contrast with today's lower numbers shows how sharply the escape environment hardened in recent years. So when someone says, "I escaped North Korea," the sentence usually hides several different prisons: hunger in one place, statelessness in another, and memory in all the years after. The decision to run often began long before the river, in homes where famine, fear of arrest, black market punishment, abuse, or family disgrace made staying feel more deadly than leaving. The route then split into stages that each carried a different kind of terror: ice at the Tumen, resale risk in China, police checks on buses, and new crossings through deserts, jungles, or the Mekong. Even the people who looked helpful had to be judged in seconds, because one broker might move you toward Thailand, while another might sell you into marriage for a few thousand renminbi. That is why so many women describe the first food or shelter in China as emotionally confusing, since the same bowl of rice that feels like rescue can become the opening move in trafficking. The numbers after 2020 deepen that picture because arrivals did not merely dip. They collapsed from 1,047 in 2019 to 63 in 2021 before edging back only partly. North Korea's 1 to 2 kilometer buffer zones, expanded fencing, patrol roads, watchtowers, and shoot on-site orders turned the northern border into an even harsher machine. China's position made the pressure worse, because people who reached the far bank still had no legal protection and could be pushed back into interrogation, detention, or forced labor. That is why testimonies keep returning to sound and body details: boots on ice, dogs near a stopped bus, guards in Vietnam, neck-deep water in the Mekong, and the effort to keep one family photo dry. Even South Korea, where 81% later reported life satisfaction in a 2025 survey, does not erase the older layers of fear or the grief of family separation. Employment at 61.3% and unemployment at 5.4% show progress, but the roughly 23% earnings gap shows how long adaptation can take after survival. The heavy share of women, about 72% of cumulative arrivals, keeps reminding us that this story is also about gendered risk, trafficking, and the way escape routes prey on female vulnerability. The river crossing matters, but it is only one frame in a much longer film built from ice, brokers, police checks, locked rooms, buses stopped by dogs, and rivers crossed again in the dark. That long route also explains why some defectors who finally reach South Korea still sound as if part of them never left China, because stateless fear rewires trust itself. When a person has survived famine, sale, detention risk, and family separation, freedom can arrive with gratitude and panic in the same breath, which many memoir-level accounts describe openly. That is why the strongest way to tell this story is not with one unbelievable celebrity twist. It is with the overlapping details that return across testimony, reports, and official numbers. The broad pattern is not in dispute. Home can become unlivable, China can become the most dangerous zone, and freedom can still feel unreal even after the body reaches safety. If one image should stay with you, keep the one of a person standing in black water, listening for a shot, while still not knowing that the worst danger may wait on the other bank. And if this story changed how you see escape, watch the next video on what happens inside the mind after survival, because for many defectors, the border stays alive long after the crossing ends.